Welcome to our Freedom Talks, part of the freedom circles of our political movement República Libre. My name is Eric Fortunato, and today our guest for this talk is David Wiley. David Wiley, who was the chair of the Snohomish County Libertarian Party. I hope that I got that
Yep,
right.
you did well.
From 2019 to 2021 in Washington State, and ran for the office of state representative in 2020 and 2022, achieving 33% of the vote against a 16-year Democrat incumbent. He actively serves on multiple committees for the Libertarian Party of Washington State. Since 2018, he has visited Ukraine multiple times and has assisted with voluntary humanitarian relief and defense responses to the current Russian offensive. He likes this quote from Thomas Paine: "The world is my country, all mankind are my brethren, and to do good is my religion." In República Libre, we found David because of his article in Learn Liberty, where he talked about libertarian alternatives to the Ukraine war. Welcome, David. How are you today?
I am doing well today, and every day is a great day to keep fighting for liberty.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
David, you start your article pointing out something that deserves a serious reflection. If we want libertarian political movements to be taken seriously in the public debate, and I quote, "It is well known that non aggression is a core principle of libertarianism and that we are decidedly anti war. Unfortunately, we are often presented with a false dichotomy of how this works in practice. Supposedly, we must either take the position of duopoly on wars of aggression, imperialism, and the military industrial complex, or that we must seek to be a completely non interventionist country waiting for foreign oppressors to murder our families before we can respond." David, why do you think the debate has fallen into this kind of dilemma between libertarian groups?
Yeah, some of it's kind of old human nature. Here in the US, we see a lot of it that either you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. There's only two sides. I'm either for this or I'm against it. There's no other way. And, people haven't really thought of their options. Everything is presented kind of in this false dilemma, when often the proper answer is neither, right? It's not your dictator or their dictator. The correct answer is to reject them both.
Hmm. You pointed out another important matter in regards to morality, and I quote, "It is immoral to trade with bandits, thieves, or those responsible for slave labor. As such, libertarians can advocate for embargoes or sanctions against these activities and demand restitution for the victims, in this case, Ukraine and its trading partners." Why do you think this principle is not understood?
Some people get really hung up on free trade by thinking that, the word free there means nothing and that we can just trade with whoever. There should be absolutely no limits. But the whole idea of trade is that it's nonviolent, that it's peaceful, that no force is involved, right? So if someone is using slave labor that isn't theirs, you're not actually trading, right? That is stolen labor. Same thing with stolen products. So in the example of Russia stealing grain from Ukrainian silos and putting it in their ships, that's not free trade if you want to buy that, because the people who labored for it, the people who worked, are not being rewarded. You're encouraging theft and violence, right? And we as libertarians should always oppose that.
Definitely, and in the current affair of events, it gets tricky.
Yeah.
Those kind of scenarios, and like when you're like depend on other countries and like depend on like whatever they're doing, and if you owe them and whatnot, and I like the what that, for example, actual free trade and what you're saying. Um, it's really important to, for example, for countries like ours, that if you can actually have free trade with those with that principle on mind, um, that can avoid our countries to be negotiating or like forced to negotiate with
Yep.
countries that violate those liberties.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a very important principle. It has to be free trade. That word free there does not, free trade doesn't simply mean whatever. It's kind of ironic that some people say, oh, the government shouldn't stop me, but their government should stop other people's. Like, no, we're not libertarians to pick one government over the other. People should trade without force or fraud in any transaction.
You talk about the whataboutism. That even sounds funny. That pro Putin sympathizers use, like asking or demanding the same policies to be used in the war of Yemen, to rebuke or accuse those that had concerns for the freedom of Ukrainians and favor the defense aid and efforts for the Ukrainian government. Why do you think it is so hard to accept that you can be in favor of weapons embargo in the Yemen war and at the same time also support Ukraine in their defense efforts?
Uh, well, first of all, I want to say, that word embargo, it's a little tricky, but I'm not in favor of a embargo because that would mean that U.S. ships would go and use force to stop, you know, any weapons
Mm.
from entering. Whereas my position is both sides are committing aggressive acts of violence against civilians, and the U.S. government should have no part in it whatsoever. I don't, if there's a humanitarian role to be had, I would be open to discussion of that, but I honestly don't know what humanitarian role is available to the U.S. government in Yemen. And so, in my opinion, the best approach is just to get out. Now, in Ukraine, it's a different story. There's a clear aggressor who has sent troops and missiles over the border of one country to kill people who have not attacked them in another country. It's a clear act of aggression. There's a clear one side there that we can act in. And the question is how, right? How do we act? And that was really why I wrote my article, was to make people think about it. What are our options? Because there's discussion, yes, we should oppose Russia, but what do we do? Because our own governments often behave wrong, and we need to recognize that, right? So we need to push for libertarian solutions to Russia's aggression and the next country that's going to commit aggression. It's the same story. We shouldn't care about what flag is being waved or where they are. We don't have national teams. Libertarianism is not about nationalism at all, right? We are the party of principle.
There are also others that prefer to look the other way because they think it's not their problem. But history tells us otherwise, either directly or indirectly, it's everyone's problem, and any war uh, has its effects to every country, everybody. And for example, here in Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic, the price of steel rose as a consequence of less production from the steelworks in Ukraine. In Ukraine, in the case of the USA, in their independence war, they got help from European volunteers and also the French Navy that helped the Revolutionary Army against the British colonial power. Why do you think this happens? Why will if history shows us that, why will people like just look the other way?
Uh, war is scary, and being involved means a threat that, what is happening may turn your way. Um, I like to say, morality doesn't change whether something is done collectively as a nation or individually. And so often say, well, look, let's imagine that our nations are people, and my nation is walking along and it sees a big bully attacking someone on the street. I don't need to know that they're completely innocent. I need to know who's the aggressor, and then I have, the moral authority to intervene should I so choose to. And people do. But even when you can, it's scary, right?
Mm.
Because intervening in any way like that brings that attention onto you. And I respect that a lot of nations, like many that are Russia's neighbors, don't want to bring that attention on them, right?
Mm.
That's to be expected. It's actually, we should maybe be more surprised that so many countries that are Russia's neighbors are, risking retaliation to support Ukraine.
Also, I mean, you talk about like being scared, and I think that on top of that, we should ask like, what will be scarier, like not doing something, or if it gets worse, like being worst case scenario, like a path towards totalitarianism, like less freedom for for everybody, and that would be like scary because I mean, we have like we have the 20th century just there, and everything with the Second World War and all that.
Yeah. I was just going to use the Second World War as an example, right? Like, let's do nothing about Hitler invading Austria. Maybe something else will happen. Maybe somebody will stop it. Then let's do nothing about him invading Czechoslovakia, right? And then let's do nothing about him invading Poland. And now it looks like it might be too late, right? And that's the thing. If somebody's not going to act, well, then who, right? And we have to decide, okay, when are we really going to stand for liberty? Where are we going to stand for it? And I hear a lot of people saying, oh, we have to stand for liberty here locally. And my answer is we should stand for it everywhere we can, right? Maybe I can't make Washington State, a bastion of liberty for everyone. If I can do some help anywhere, that's great. Let's grow liberty everywhere we can.
Instead of the current dilemma, what do you think about like this? I'm gonna propose this. And you will tell me what do you think. It might be better to propose a new kind of like framework of analysis, one that holds freedom, in which, in this case, and I think you were telling some about this in the beginning. If both sides are enemies of freedom, then you abstain. But if one side has a real commitment for defense of freedom, then support that side. Would you think this offers a better frame of analysis of the international events, international relations from a libertarian perspective?
I mean, I think there's definitely something there as far as like international agreements, trade agreements, mutual defense treaties. Yes. But I think from the non-aggression principle, anywhere we see someone being unjustly aggressed on, we have moral authority to help, to intervene in an appropriate way. Someone doesn't have to be a saint of liberty in order to deserve protection, right? Again, to the individual example, if I'm walking down the street and I see someone just violently attacked, I don't need to know that the person who's attacked is a saint. They might be a bad person, but nobody deserves the initiation of violence against them, right? It's never justified. So whenever it is, then we are justified to take, the action that we feel is appropriate. And I also feel that when we do that, when we reach out to help people in this way, in our principles, it grows liberty because people say, hey, there's a benefit. This is good, right? That though they love freedom so much that they protected my freedom, right? And that has more than anything, is what I believe the last couple centuries has really grown liberty around the world, right? It's individuals in particular, but also as voluntary groups coming together to say, hey, let's all be free. Right? That's, the success story of the United States isn't that there was one colony that fought for freedom. It was, unite or die, right? They had to come together to fight for each other's freedom. And really, wherever possible, as you said, where we see someone else wants freedom, we should be working together to preserve each other's freedom.
And as you were talking about, like the U.S. in their beginnings, I want us to discuss something, and it is the thing about central planification. Evidently, we cannot fall into that to build freedom in other parts of the world. That will be a mistake, as Christopher Preble says in his book, Peace, War, and Liberty: Understanding U.S. Foreign Policy. And I quote, in other words, it cannot be an imperialism that allows you to be free as we understand it, more decisively supporting those who believe in freedom and need a friendly hand in their fight against totalitarianism. For example, the role of the United States supporting the United Kingdom in the Second World War.
Yeah. Um, yeah, no, there's a lot of truth there, and it's, I'm not familiar with the author, but to what I heard, a lot of that does kind of ring true.
In his book Liberalism from Von Mises, he explains the following. The liberals of an earlier age thought that the peoples of the world were peaceable by nature and that only monarchs desire war in order to increase their power and wealth by the conquest of provinces. What will be Mises' take on the Ukraine invasion by Putin?
Oh, I think that's pretty. So Mises was actually born in Galicia, which is modern day Ukraine. He was a Ukrainian speaker and was very familiar with Russia. And I think it was the First World War he fought against Russia. And he did write about it in Liberalism. At the time, it was the Soviet Union, but he talked about their long history of aggression. And Russia has become the largest country in the world, territorial by landmass, through nonstop wars of aggression. The U.S. has a mixed record, but at least it's mixed. Sometimes we've grown by buying land, right? Not always the people there who have that choice, but a lot of it has been more peaceful. Versus Russia has a long history of doing this. And Mises wrote in Liberalism that the world should simply say, we're not going to accept any more military expansion. We will trade with you peacefully if you want to do that, but come together, and those nations that want to be free need to work together to stop the expansionist warmongering mindset. And I want to, warmonger, that's a word that gets thrown around a lot in libertarian circles without really being defined. And I think if you read Mises, it will really help with that definition. The warmonger is someone who initiates war. It is the aggressor. And that is who we as libertarians, no matter who it is, it could be my country the next time, it could be yours, who knows? But whoever the aggressor is, as libertarians, as people of principle, we need to say no.
Mises says something about Russia in that same book, and listen to this. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the Russian Tsars incorporated into their empire large areas whose population had never felt the desire to belong to the Russian state. Even if the Russian Empire had adopted a completely democratic constitution, The wishes of the inhabitants of these territories would not have been satisfied because they simply did not desire to associate themselves in any bond of political union with the Russians. Their democratic demands was freedom from the Russian Empire. Something else that Mrs. adds in page 111 of the book is the liberal does not expect to abolish war by preaching and moralizing. He seeks to create the social conditions that will eliminate the causes of war. What do you think of his perspective?
I think it's absolutely right. We're trying to eliminate the causes of war by promoting a voluntary society, right? A society based on consent, a society based on trade. When we are trading, for someone to start a war becomes detrimental. Look at the economic cost to Russia right now, not just in sanctions, but they're literally throwing missiles worth hundreds of millions that could be spent building their society, building their infrastructure, right? Um, so many Russians live in poverty. And why? Well, because they're fueling this war machine. So people, I believe, are seeing this. They're seeing the difference. We can have prosperity or we can have war. And people will voluntarily choose it. But the other side, the flip side is at the same time, all of those who don't want war have to be prepared to defend themselves and possibly each other.
Totally. It's been long since Mrs. wrote liberalism, but, and I want to bear with me a little bit here, um, because I'm gonna read some portions that are dedicated to the Russians, and they are in the pages 151 to 154, depending on the edition. Anybody, all that are listening, they may have. Today's, we think these pages resound a lot. So, first portion. By and large, one can say of the nations of the white race that today inhabit Central and Western Europe and America that the mentality that Herbert Spencer called militaristic has been displaced by that to which he gave the name industrial. Today, there is only one great nation that steadfastly adheres to the militaristic ideal, this, the Russians. Number two, of course, even among the Russian people, there are some who do not share this attitude. It is only to be regretted that they have not been able to prevail over their compatriots. Number three, ever since Russia was first in a position to exercise an influence on European politics, it has continually behaved like a robber who lies in wait for who lies in wait for the moment when he can pounce upon his victim and plunder him of his possessions. Number four, Russia is endowed far more richly by nature with fertility of soil and mineral resources of all kinds than is the United States. If the Russians had pursued the same capitalistic policy as the Americans, they would today be the richest people in the world. Despotism, imperialism, and Bolshevism had made them the poorest. Number five, the guiding principle of the policy of the civilized nations toward Russia. Let the Russians be Russians. Let them do what they want in their own country, but do not let them pass beyond the boundaries of their own land to destroy European civilization. In the light of all that has happened since Mises wrote this, and considering the evolution of today's event, we could say that he was right, or what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're seeing right now Russia's reaching beyond their boundaries to, ruin the Europe that Mises knew in its modern form. They want to reach into Ukraine and they want to smash it. I think, part of it and why is that Ukraine, as a Russian speaking nation, is exporting ideas that are dangerous to the oligarchs of Russia, right? It's not just about land. It's,
Hmm.
you know, good ideas don't require force, but bad ideas always do. Um, so it is a war, basically, it's the exact war for liberalism that Mises was writing about. I think the thing that's really changed since he wrote that has been the rise of the American empire, right? That I'm not sure he would have imagined in that time, American military bases reaching so far around the world, or the rise of China. And, we'll see where they go. But right now, the issue of war in our time revolves around how do we respond to Russia?
And you just told that Russia does not like the ideas that are getting export from Ukraine. Could you elaborate more on like what are those?
Yeah, there's a lot of criticism, of course, that can be leveled against Ukraine or any country, but they have open discussion about ideas of liberalizing, right? They're an ex-Soviet country, and Russia can't reach the Baltics as they're protected by NATO, but they can
Mm,
reach into Ukraine, which has had a series of revolutions in their own country to remove corruption, to remove leaders that tried to seize dictatorial power, right? And if
mm.
you're a dictator in Russia, what greater threat is there than a nation that has successfully overthrown someone who tried to be a dictator in their own country, right? It's an example that he wants to squash.
Mm.
And wherever Ukraine goes, he wants it to be under his thumb, not as a sovereign, independent, and free nation.
Another reason why uh, people that are looking for freedom and countries that are looking for freedom uh, need to be defended, and like we have like to raise our voices in favor of those because freedom has like to topple um, any any path toward totalitarianism and toward like any kind of slavery. You were gonna say?
In the Soviet Union, in the whole area, there was the infamous Iron Curtain. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason for that was nobody could know how good things were in the West. That if they could be free, that if they could live over there, right, if they could live the same way, then their lives would be improved so much. And it's the same thing with Russia. For their people to see how much better that, their that neighbors can have it simply with freedom, because freedom brings prosperity, right? Prosperity for everyone except those who are trying to live at the expense of everyone else.
Mm. That remind that reminds me the definition of state by Bastiat. Like, what is the state? Oh, well, the great illusion of everyone that wants to impose themselves to live out of the others. Yeah.
To quote Frederic Bastiat, who had a great quote that those, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly, but those who want to live at the expense of government
Mm.
forget that government lives at the expense of everyone else.
Yep. In the same essay. Yep. I
So,
encourage everybody that's listening to us that to read that essay about like the state and like how some politicians uh, operates against us.
and that accurately describes the political class here in Washington state as well as it does the political class in Russia or anywhere else. Those of us who want to, not me, but those people who want to beg the government to save them and provide for them and be their parents forget that the government is not a producer. It's a parasite. It lives off of us.
Well, David, we are very grateful for your time and willingness to talk about like this topic that is something like really on the public debate and like really important and as liberals slash libertarians we need to make a stand for freedom and liberty. And we want to finish this talk with a message for the people of Ukraine. And the message is this: from Republika Libre, we know that freedom will triumph. Slava Ukraini.
Heroim slava.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.